Yeah, it's lovely to see so many of you here. As I said, a few bits of housekeeping. If possible, please could you keep yourselves on mute, just so we can really hear Cheryl. If there are any questions, please do add them in the chat or raise your hand. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for a Q&A at the end, but also we'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well and feeding in any questions to Cheryl herself during the interview. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Harvey. I'm editor of Co-op News, and with me is Sarah Aldred from the Co-op College. And Sarah and I started the Co-op Women's Voices about a year ago now, to have conversations with different interesting women from throughout the co-op movement, both in the UK and internationally, to really hear what makes them tick, what has been their journey, who are they, and how have they got to where they are. So we've had some very, very interesting people over the last 12 months. We've got plenty more planned, but today we're delighted to introduce Cheryl Barrett, who will tell you all about her very, very exciting life. In summary, you know, Cheryl is she's the vice chair of Co-ops UK, which is how a lot of people may know her. She also chairs the Sheffield Cooperative Development Group. She chairs the Cooperative Parties Disability Network and is also a co-founder of Change Agents. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, and as I said, please do, if possible, keep yourselves on mute and put any questions you have in the chat.
Thanks, Beth. And as Beth just said, we tend to we take turns between us in terms of intros and leading the women through the interview. So it's my fortune this month to work with Cheryl and just ask her a series of questions around Cheryl's journey, really, because the main thing we want to know is what's the source of these women's lives. So Cheryl, first of all, a loose question about you. So what started you on your co-op journey? Because I know we had a quick chat with you last week. One of the key things that I remember from that conversation was that you said, cooperation is the background noise to my life. So what started you on your cooperative journey, Cheryl?
I was born into a family of cooperators, but not in the architecture, if that makes sense. So both the grannies were cooperators, and when I was little, I used to run and get their milk checks. Back then in the day, our whole life was kind of wrapped around cooperation. So in terms of my school uniform, my holiday clothes, I'm old enough to have done Whitsuntide. That was done on the divvy. So it was just a way of life. It was the welfare state for working class people, where you weren't pathologized. And in terms of redistribution, we were doing that ourselves. We were redistributing by cooperation. So, and I wasn't aware of that. It was just how my life was. I didn't know that cooperation was, now it seems a bit culty, you know what I mean? This is like in a vanguard of cooperators, but back then it was just how we lived our lives. And I would include in that as well working men's clubs, which a lot of people realize, you know, are the co-op world. So my granddad was a steward. We used to go on the trip with the lemonade and the crisps and throw up on the way there, and because they fed us all the sweeties and whatever, run riot round Cleethorpes or Skegness and then come back again. So there was this whole life that was around, you know, a working class life around working class institutions that was centered around the Labour Party, the trade unions and the co-op movement. That's what it was. But it was also, I had a very matriarchal family. And that's not being rude about the men in our family, but it's just how it is. I come from a very, very strong line of matriarchal women, and that is my understanding of the patriarchy. So it wasn't until, because I'm the first one in my family with a degree, so it wasn't until I started meeting more middle-class people and I got out of the bubble that I lived my life, that I realized I was working class, and that I started to kind of cotton on to things like Maslow and Marx. It made no sense to me in context of the matriarchy that I had seen, and the networking and the cooperation and the way that families and communities were actually run. I've never been able to reconcile these two things, and eventually I got to an age where I thought that's because it's not reconcilable. I just took myself down another intellectual cul-de-sac just for the laugh, and then decided, no, I'm going to go back into cooperation because, you know, that's the place to be. So it was all about mutuality, networking, the things that women do naturally, you know. It is, to me, is cooperation.
And it's just fascinating, just to pause you there, Cheryl, really, because, you know, you use the words, and it's really interesting, you know, about cooperation as a verb, you know. So yes, there is a cooperative movement, but actually it's wider than that, and it's how we live and how we are. You sent us some pictures through, so maybe it might be a really nice time just to talk through some of these images, because there again, it'll give us a bit more of a sense of you and, you know, who you are. So I think Bex is going to share some pictures, and if you just want to talk us through just some of these images and why you've chosen them. Okay,
if you stop at that one, that is Julia, and Julia fled the famine, basically. So, and I'm not into all the politics about the famine, who caused it and for what purpose now, but I come from a family that is both Irish and travelling heritage, and also very British working class. So I also come from a tradition of hedge schooling and history, and communities sharing history through songs and storytelling. And Julia was the ancestress that came across to Sheffield, and it was the Duke of Norfolk in Sheffield, owned Sheffield. When I was young, we paid ground rent to the Duke of Norfolk, and in Ireland it wasn't just ground rent, he was an absent landlord. And Sheffield was built by Irish people, actually, and local people from the countryside and on the rivers, cutleries, being brought into the Industrial Revolution as workers. And so we, you know, post-famine, we were shipped across. My family was shipped across because they managed not to die of starvation, to work in industry 24 hours. And there's a shop near me called Morrison's, and that's part of what was the old barracks. And the barracks was put there to keep people working around the clock 24/7. Wow. And knowing that history and knowing what that was about, and being part of that community and sharing those histories with Chrissy Malidi, another great cooperative woman you really ought to get on here. She set up the Children's Centre. And I just had an awareness of her. And now, well, I've got 19 grandchildren. They stop over at weekends in batches. Teresa calls them the hobgoblins. And we lay in bed and we sing songs together. And one of the songs we sing is Julia. And there's a line in there that I've kind of lived my life by. And that is, if I cannot sing my heart, then I will speak my mind.
Oh, that's amazing. It's amazing. It's fascinating, that whole storytelling song, you know, singing kind of background. We could do the whole day with you, Cheryl, I'm sure. But anyway, the next picture.
That was the last big meeting we had in Big Up. I was the Associate Director of Better Government for Older People. I did a lot of the work around participation and voice, and people, bringing people together to look at co-producing their own services. However, we were hitting on too much vested interest, very powerful voices that closed us down. So they closed Big Up down, but we refused to die, and we became the legacy organisation Change Agents. So we came away from being a government partnership and became a multi-stakeholder cooperative called Change Agents that has moved and has now become the guild, the Cooperative Guild of Social and Community Workers.
Wow. So yeah, next one, Bex.
That's Chrissy Malidi and myself. That is a do, actually, for another traveller, Sheffield traveller that you might have all heard of, Brendan Ingle. And the Ingles have got a gym, you know, and they would bring lads into that gym. And not only did they train world-class fighters, they developed world-class human beings. Everybody that came out of the Ingle gym became, you know, a great human being. And that was a night when Brendan was still around. You can see him in the back there, actually, when we were all gathering to kind of celebrate Brendan, but the Irish and travelling community, because we're kind of around, but not necessarily visible for obvious historical reasons. And we were just celebrating our contribution.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's great seeing you in these different guises as well, Cheryl. So Co-op Party, who are you with there?
I'm with Kat Rose, who was the youth representative in the Co-op Party, great girl. And she did a lot of work. She did a lot and still does a lot in the group, in the Co-op group. So that was Yorkshire and the Humber. And I know Teresa's on this call. So I kind of made my way from Sheffield to Yorkshire and the Humber through, you know, the Co-op line, because I kind of organised in one area, and then they sent me to Yorkshire and the Humber, and then Yorkshire and the Humber sent me to the national team. And it's great to see people here. And it really was that wind beneath my wings kind of thing. I was swept into the Co-op movement by wonderful cooperative women that would push me into places because they wanted to make use of the fact that I don't shut up. Stop talking, go and talk over there, and kind of pushed me in. So there was a great responsibility, actually, that if you're the one out of a group of people that is supported to be put in a place, you have to make a difference. You have to do something. And I'm looking at Jenny now. Jenny Barnes was on NEC with me, and it was Jenny and other women there that kind of, I didn't want to be the vice chair, and they kept ringing me up and saying, you've got to do it, you've got to do it, you've got to do it, until I did it, you know. And that's been the thing throughout this journey, that I would kind of, there'd be a journey, and then there'd be like a staging post where things happened, like the stuff that happens locally with SCDG and the party, and then there'd be things that happen in the region, and then things that happen nationally. But the whole fuel for that, and kind of the engine that drove me there, was other Co-op women that supported me into these places and spaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So next one, Bex. So what's next?
This is down in Glastonbury. So this is my kind of alternative cooperative world that I suppose doesn't get spoke about very often, but that's the Goddess Temple in Glastonbury, and I am croned. And what it is a ritual where, let me take you back. You know the moon phases, and the moon has the same etymology as month, you know, the monthlies and the moon, and the symbol of moon and women. And so there's a symbol for women where you've got the circle. Yeah. Oh God, I look like I'm the Illuminati now, don't I? You've got the circle, which is the full moon. So it's woman at her ripest, the mother. Before that, you kind of get the maid. So you've got the waxing moon as it's kind of coming, and then the crone, kind of waning moon, and the kind of characteristics and the spirituality and sensuality and the passions and drives of women in different stages of their lives as symbolized by the moon. And there's a ritual called croning, which I did, and I sent it to you. And I'm Bevian in that, because my name within that world is the Gaelic version of Vivian, because I come from Sheffield, you know, and the forging of the sword. And Excalibur in Gaelic is Ex-Caelec, which means from the waters of the dark-faced goddess. And it's the woman in a dark aspect, which is the crone. So I have a very, very rich spiritual life as well, that again is a form of cooperation. So, and I highly recommend to any woman to do the ritual of croning and to accept your age and who you are, and honor the journey where you are, and wherever you are in that journey, be in the eternal now and be who you are in that journey, totally awake to where you are on the road in that journey.
Fascinating. I mean, I love this kind of stuff anyway, Cheryl, but I'm reading all the Amanda Scott books at the minute on Boudica, so which I'm just completely, this is fantastic. So yeah, we'll just move you through, Bex. So yeah, what's the next image then? Oh,
This is my garden.
No.
And it's a very, if you're a traveller, you'd recognise this as a traveller garden because it's in situ with nature. You can see how it sits in there. And at the bottom of that garden, what you can't see is I've got a wheel, which is the symbol for travellers, is the wheel and that constant motion. And my dad said that I was the law of perpetual motion incarnate, which with my disability is a godsend, believe me. It was terrible in my youth. I drove people mad with all this energy, but I really, really need it now. So we've got a fire pit down there, and my family lives indoors and outdoors. And so I've got folding sliding doors that brings the outdoors in. So although I live in bricks and mortar, I still live culturally a very traveller life with, you know, kind of gatherings and outdoor spaces. But there's a little signpost you can see there.
See that? Let's see what it says.
It's in Shigila, and it's where Julia came from.
Oh, so bad.
It's in Shigila, and my husband, bless him, he kind of got his compass out and made sure it's pointing home. And it says in Shigila 8.5 miles. And you know, in the legends, there are 9 ladies. So it's like I'm only half a lady away from home.
Gosh, I love that. I love that. Thanks. Okay. Next one. Next slide.
Oh, that's me singing.
Go in there.
That's me singing. In my youth, when I was less disabled, it wasn't just my hands that I threw around. There was arms, there was legs, there was everything. You know what I mean? And
right.
So I was a dancer. That's a sound check. And there's a story to this as well, because we came for the sound check, and I was in my dungarees because I used to help lift, you know, all the gear and everything. I would come in with the lads and I would lift it all up, and it was really strange being the only woman in a band, because all the other women were the girlfriends of the people in the band, but I was the leader of the band. And this is back in the 80s and it caused a bit of a schism in relationships because I wasn't a very girly girl. But then I'm there I am at the sound check, and we're setting up whatever. And there was another sound engineer as well as mine in there. And he said to me, "You'll have to get off the stage, love, now, because we're ready for the sound check." And I was like, huh? And he said, "You will have to leave the stage now, love, because we're ready for the sound checks." I thought, all right. So I left the stage and I came back in full rubber frock and boa and did the sound check. And this is my bandmate.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. It's great. So what's this?
That, oh God, that is a trailer, not a caravan.
Okay.
And it's got a very long name, and the name describes what it is. It's a Roma, that's the name of the company, and I'm a friend of Dan Sullivan's who owns the company. It's why I loved it so much. I bought the company. No, I didn't buy it, but I'm a good friend of the man who has it. And this is a vintage one. So in the travelling community, that's the equivalent of a grade 2 listed. It's vintage, and the inside of it is absolutely beautiful. Everything was, you know, that was made by Waring and Gillow engineers. It's stunning. And as you can see, it's straight through, because we don't, well, I can't tell you the saying in the community, but it's basically we don't defecate and eat in the same place. Yeah. So that's where we live and sleep, and we go out to kind of wash and in the shower block, whatever. And it's called a straight through. It's a Showman's Supreme Special straight through trailer, and all of that glass is hand cut. Yeah, there's glass everywhere. There's glass in the cabinets, and I collect depression wear glass because in America, the show people used to have carnival glass. You'll have heard of carnival glass and depression wear glass.
Right.
Yeah. And it was made in times of depression, and the show people would give away. If you zoom in, you'll see these plates and these jugs, and I used them all, and they were given away to people as prizes.
It's exquisite, actually. I mean,
It is absolutely stunningly beautiful, and it was given away as prizes. And again, it's parts of not just traveller history, but working class history in terms of those beautiful, exquisite pieces were given away because people couldn't afford to buy a plate.
No, absolutely. Oh, fab. Okay, thanks. So who's this?
This is Katie Crunchy. That is Julia's granddaughter and my grandmother. And when I was a mother and first a grandmother, I was part of 5 generations because I come from a culture that doesn't have generational shifts. We just keep having babies. They're just babies and babies that are appearing all the time that are part of the family. So I've got 19 grandchildren, 4 of them great grandchildren. So I'm now part of 5 generations. And I was part of 5 generations with Kate, my nan Kate. However, her mum died of breast cancer when she was only 42 and my nan was 9. And she used to go knocking on doors and hawking, basically, paper, stationery, because her dad was a bare knuckle boxer and part of the Sheffield gang wars and the pitch and toss and all of that. But he was also a very fine artist, and he would make bespoke stationery, we call them the big houses, to the people in the big houses. And that kept them out of the workhouse. He managed to bring up his children by doing whatever it took to keep them together.
Yeah. Gosh, it's a great, I love that picture, actually. It's,
she's beautiful, isn't she? And my granddaughter, Amelia Catherine, the eldest, she's the spitting image of her.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the Kate Bush song, The Jig of Life?
No, I don't.
Highly recommend it to you because it talks about looking in the mirror and seeing the line on your face, in her face, down the stream of life. And in Irish, we believe when we die, we go to Tír na nÓg, which is the land of youth. And you can see, you know, the white horses that ride on the waves. So you hear in Irish music on the bowrum, the rhythm of the water and the crashes and the waves that are taking us into the stream of life. And so when you kind of see those faces and your faces and the next faces, there's a covenant between generations and a linking and a responsibility down those lines.
Yeah, gosh. Fab, was there any more pictures there, or are we no? Brilliant, Cheryl, thanks for that. So in terms of, I mean, we want to show pictures because it kind of just gives a richer sense of you, really. So one of the next questions we were asking about was about your early adult years, really. What has shaped you? And you know, there again, those images give us a real sense of who you are and what's really important to you. But what in your early adult life, you know, what was it that shaped you? Because the purpose of these is for other women to look at you because you're a role model, you know, you're an inspiration. You are Cheryl, you know, and you know, what was it, you know, what has shaped you? So in these early adult years, you know, what were you up to, you know, and what were you engaged in, and who were the women who you were around as well?
Well, in early adult life, there were obviously shades of, you know, being young. And one of the things that in my youth was that we didn't have a council house because families like ours didn't have council houses. And we lived in, I see Nadia now, bless your nuts. I lived in the parts of Sheffield where all the immigrant communities kind of came in, around Burngreave and Pittsmore. And I was brought up in the days of no blacks, no Irish, no dog. And as a traveller, you know, when I tried to pitch that anywhere, no traveller is still here. You know, that the signs have disappeared, but you're not welcome here is made very, very obvious. So that was part of my life, and wanting to understand Julia's journey and traveling through life as well as traveling through the world. I was a young woman in the 80s that had grown up in a house with my mum and dad, my mum's cousin and her husband, who was black, because he had come from America during the war and had stayed because it was so much better in Sheffield than it was going back home to America. So we were the first black family in Hillsborough, and you go, but you're not black. Well, if you've got a black person living in your house, you are a black family. That is, and people talk about white adjacent, but you also are black adjacent. And I'm very happy to say that my family is, we've got Malawians, we've got the Zimmers, which is what people from Zimbabwe call themselves, the Zimmers. We've got like half of the continent of Africa, Asia, and being an outsider, an inside outsider, means that your life just naturally follows that inside outside pattern. And so in my young life, I was in Sheffield, industry was decimated, and it was both the steelworks, the miners. So the women, the wives of the steelworkers and the miners, who were my family, my family and my extended family. And the fight that we had, I was at Greenham Common. I was one of the people that actually was on the lines in the miners' strike at Orgreave, and Orgreave Justice, whatever. As a young woman, I was on that picket line. But also, so alongside of that, I was also a singer, because I couldn't believe how easy it was to make money as a singer with no other job opportunities. And in our family, you shake a tree and 10 of us fall out with perfect pitch, you know what I mean? So you're like, whoa. So that if everything is falling down, but this is easy money, and people are actually paying me to do what I would have done anyway. So I managed to get a very good living with a band and as a session singer. But we were also using the old Cutler's firms, the little nesters, putting egg boxes on and creating studios and rehearsal time and the arts and all sorts of things that working class kids don't usually get an opportunity to do.
Yeah.
We were kind of there doing that. So we took over the Freeman's Hall and we created a co-op. I had to get through the skylight because, as you can see, I was quite little, skinny and live then. So I was on somebody's shoulders, pushed through the skylight, got in, opened the door, and we took it over as a form of protest, but also to show how to deliver services. So we had street sleepers in dormitories, we ran creches, we taught people how to be creche workers and got them certified, and that links to the Children's Centre and what happened there. And we just created what we couldn't find. We didn't wait for anybody to give it to us. We built it as co-ops. So I come from a background of cooperation of necessity. If it ain't there, build it.
And this is fascinating, and just because I'm always going back to what shapes you, and how that can influence the women. So at that time, I mean, obviously, so it's the community and the family around you that was actually supporting you. Is that right? So who around you at this time? And it was
a pretty mixed bag. Because it was the miners' wives who never get the story of the miners' wives and what they did while they were raising their children and trying to keep the homes together while the men were on strike, as well as striking, picketing, whatever. It was all of that. But that's when I learned actually that I was working class.
Yeah.
Because in terms of that struggle, there were middle class people that were kind of part of the protests and all of that. But I was also around, Pulp, the Human League, Def Leppard, all of that. And so the song Common People, I remember it very well because I remember the people that came in and wanted to sleep with us because we were like exotic pets. And that's moved on now because we became boring. And I often think, when people talk about white privilege and privilege in general, that they never mention the real relationship between privilege, which is patronage.
Yeah.
And so within that co-op movement, I didn't understand patronage as well as to be patronized until I started meeting people beyond my kind of cozy, comfy. But in some ways it didn't matter that relatively we were poorer. That story of community and how we shared and how we all looked after each other's kids and all of that is true. We did. And so that was my world. So that as a young woman, I then started stepping beyond my comfortable world, into this other world. So I'd always been very aware that there are different races and cultures, because we all were there in Burngreave, Pittsmore, whatever. What I wasn't really aware of, where I'd never been, is to that very comfortable place where the real decisions are made that impacted on us back there, and understanding power. Really, I understood power when I understood the power within the community is not the same as the power without, and what it is to be acted upon rather than to be acted with.
Yeah, gosh. And this segues nicely, Cheryl, to kind of just the word entering into, you know, the co-op world, as in, you know, the co-op and because I know you've had a mix of public sector professional life and the co-op world. Do you want to just talk a little bit about those and how they intersected? Because I know when we chatted last week, it was fascinating actually how you described that intersection between the public sector and the co-op world, and your experiences there. And there again, who was around you at that time, and who were the women around you, and who was there? Because you did mention Maggie Thatcher at one point. So
I did. Well, Margaret Thatcher, you know, not every woman in your life is going to be a blessing. Some are a curse, aren't they? And Margaret Thatcher had a big impact on my life and my understanding of sisterhood, and you know, and again, that patronage and privilege. If you look at what she did in terms of her cabinet, whatever, not every one of us on the outside, when we get on the inside, is going to keep the door open for the rest. If you're the first one, then you should be the concierge. That's your job. You're the first one in. But no, that wasn't what she intended to do ever. And it's not only women, and in many of the communities where I've seen that happen. And so what I did was I moved from being a singer who was a community activist to being a community worker who sang. And so I started working for Sheffield City Council in the benefits advice shop, because obviously people were losing their jobs, etc., etc., etc. So I moved from there into community development. And at that time in Sheffield, we had a community development team that was citywide. It was, I've had a very blessed life, you know, I've been a singer and I've run around the world kind of wearing wonderful things and playing and getting paid for it. You know what I mean? Who wouldn't want to do that? And then, you know, in the community world, in community work, the community development that came out of Sheffield was world class in terms of, you know, the learning and how it moved into other areas. And it genuinely came from community activism and cooperation. And Sheffield Cooperative Development Group that I'm the chair of, that came out of there as well. So a shout out to the women who are still working in there, and the rest of us that tithe to keep that going. So I live in a very cooperative world. But once I got into the public sector, I saw the best and the worst of that. And one of the things that I did come across was the class ceiling, that you could come across and you could be educated, but as a working class person, there was a limit to the jobs that you were going to actually be appointed to. And again, I had a very lucky escape from that. It was fate has been wrapped around me all the time, because I worked with the Irish community. I was requested, the Irish and travelling community asked for me to be not just a generic community worker, because I'd worked with the Somali community, I'd worked with working class communities on the Norfolk Park. And again, we were looking at cooperation as a way of bringing services to people who couldn't use mainstream public services, but then to attach them to the mainstream so that there was an equality in that service. So I helped set up that transcultural mental health team. Wow. But then once I'd done that, I didn't want to spend my life working in the community in such an intimate way, because in some ways there are benefits to that in terms of opening the door, but to be the gatekeeper to that is not something I wanted to be. I wanted that to be opened up so that we could use the same public services as anybody else, because we are the public like anybody else. So I then got the opportunity to work in Better Government for Older People, which at that time was an action research project, and it was looking at demographics. And most people, when they think about Better Government for Older People, think about older people, which is great, and older people's participation. They forget the demographics. And actually, the co-op movement really needs to understand in international terms demographics, and the fact that in 20 years Africa will double its population, and in 20 years the UK is going to substantially reduce its population except by migration. Now, someone who comes from a migrant family who has an understanding of what that means to human beings. There's no such thing as free movement, like there's no such thing as free travel. That movement from A to B to serve a population in this place means an absolute tearing and rupturing of self from the other.
Yeah.
And we forget that. We fantasize that if we talk about racism as in terms of some naughty person doesn't like this very nice person, rather than demographics, real human natural behaviors, and the commodification of labor and human beings as a source of labor, then we can really start doing something about racism. We can do something about inequality. We can do something about income, because we'd be looking at what really is going on and happening. So my plea from this, if when I walk away from this, if I leave something behind, please give consideration to demographics and human beings, and that we are relational. We're not transactional.
I'm just scribbling all these notes.
My granddad was a bin man and philosopher. In Irish, we call them the Shanachie. They are the storytellers.
Yeah, thinkers and storytellers. And I think I was saying to you last week, there's a great series on Radio 4 on population recently, where it's talking about this real shift in and what then happens to, and it's fascinating then what you're saying also about there is always a rupture in some form, and it's an acknowledgement of that, really. So
it's inverse colonialism, because rather than going away and stealing the resources, we send a plane ticket and we steal younger people because we can't be bothered to breed. I mean, it is, I know I've said it in a kind of way, but if you think about the human cost of that, if we take every doctor, nurse, teacher from the developing world, from Eastern Europe into the West, because we don't want to pay for the education or for the salary, there's no virtue in that. There's no virtue signaling in that. If we want to have free movement, we have to have free people.
Yeah. Anyway, this is going off on a different subject.
I always do.
It's really fascinating. I think the whole stuff about women's rights around, all kinds of things. But so I want to, because we've got 15 minutes left, and we could go on for a couple of hours, I'm sure of it. So, I've just coming back to your role models then, and it's so you've touched on this really vibrant life, vibrant upbringing, careers just really, you're right, immersed in the kind of just the social issues. But in terms of one of the questions that we were asking you is, how important are role models to you?
Yeah.
Who are your role models, and what message would you like to give out to women, young and old, in today's world? So just if we could just spend about 5 minutes, 10 minutes on that, and
yeah. Well, so some of my role models are here, and I've been busily gathering photographs from the women who are not here, because as I said before, I'll give you a little anecdote. Sean Wellens, who most people will know, because sat down with me one day after a do, and he said to me, "How did you climb the greasy pole?" And I just laughed, because I'd never thought of it in those terms. But in reality, what happened was I was pushed up the greasy pole. And I was pushed up that pole by very co-op women. And some of them are here today. So, Teresa, who pushed me up the pole. Yeah, there you go, see, will push me up the pole, you know, from Yorkshire and the Humber into the NEC. And she's now the secretary of the Disability Forum. And, you know, I'm a vice chair. And I'd like to say something about vice chairs in the co-op movement before I leave, remind me. The vice chair of Yorkshire and the Humber is sitting here with me as well today. And so, you know, this huge, I don't want to say army, it's a collective, it's a coven, girls. This huge coven, the clue is in the name, of wonderful co-op-y women who gather, collectivise, and have enough about us and an ability not to just live on an ego-driven world. So I had to explain to Sean, I didn't climb anything. In fact, there's a saying that, you know, I was brought up with in the Irish community: be neither a crawler nor a climber, because both postures will break your back eventually. So I didn't crawl to anybody, I didn't climb to anywhere, but I was kind of pushed up by women. Some who are here today, some who are not here today. Tanya Noon, Jenny's here today. Linda Barlow helped us set up when we moved from being big up to change agents. All of these women on this journey with me, and I'm going to make this photograph and I'm going to put all their names on and I'm going to send it to you, because that's the only way I can do it in this time frame. I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't want to interview me. You wouldn't even know me if all these women, and I'm looking at Veronica now, you know, so there's all the women that pushed me into the place that, you know, that got me to my present. In my present is Veronica and what we're doing around fair care and cooperation, and it's all about ownership. Voice, ownership. So I tried to explain that to Sean in 15 minutes, and I have 15-minute bursts of trying to explain that to him every time we meet.
I think one of the things you mentioned, I mean, it was voice. You know, when we were talking last week, you said about voice.
Yeah.
So do you want to say something about that? Because I know then you started talking about singing and things. Why is voice and because important to women, do you think?
I think voice is important to everybody. And one of my bugbears about the co-op movement is there's a placeholder marked vice chair for women. Yeah. And it's the non-job that they can put us in, so it looks as if we're there and we're doing things. So we're doing all the work. So we kind of make the tea, but we don't make the decisions. So all the work underneath is kind of going on, and the, you know, the women here and the women who couldn't be here today because they are in fact working, we do all of that. So putting me in these positions was a very thought out plot to populate the vice chair with a woman who would give voice for all the women that didn't get in the vice chair. And the vice chair of Co-ops UK, when I first, you know, kind of went onto that board, we had a chair, a vice chair, and 3 subgroup chairs, all men. And it just wasn't. So then we open up the vice chair. Well, brilliant. So we open up the vice chair. So then the vice chair has to open up the next chair. So now we have Tanya Noon as well. Oh, you'll all know. Oh, it's brilliant. So now she's chairing Remco. And that's how we did it on the NEC as well, is to put a woman in the vice chair to open up the fact that we are here and we are contributing, and to give voice. So it wasn't just to give my voice. And within BGOT, it was about how I worked with older people. You'd be surprised how quiet I was in terms of being the roadie that gave the platform for their voice.
Yeah.
But voice on its own is not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough. It's got to be heard. It's got to be acted upon. And so we need sufficient people with a voice to open those doors, to tell these stories, because human beings are we are very much storytelling animals. But it's more than just hearing, it's acting upon. And for me, that is cooperation. It's operational. You hear it and you act.
And I think one of the things we were talking about, because I know over the years, me and Bex, we've done a series of things with women around speaking, you know, in public, you know, because it's always tends to be, you know, women tend to stand back and, you know, they don't put themselves forward in those kind of roles as well. And you were talking about projection and using your song, and which I found really interesting, because I've got a low voice. Not my preference really to do public speaking. I'll do it if I have to, but you just, even just for 5 minutes, you talking last week about projection.
How you stand. It's how you stand.
Yeah, and a very practical thing. So voice.
Voice.
But so maybe can you just a couple of minutes on that as well, because I found it really interesting.
To take your voice, you have to take your space.
Yeah.
If you think of how a voice is generated, if you bend down, lasses, bend down and feel your ribs in your diaphragm. If you slump, and women do, that's our posture. We're like this. If your ribs are in your diaphragm, you just halved your capacity for voice in terms of air. So then if you bring yourself up, you've got to drop down your shoulders, or you've just tightened all the muscles around your neck. And so you sound squeaky and timid and scared. So don't do that. Remember, keep these shoulders down. If you are standing and you go from your tiptoes, from flat to tiptoes, and you move forward, your spine's not in a line. So get used to standing and going heel to toe, heel to toe. Don't let your shoulders do this. Don't let your rib do that. And you'll go straight up. And if you can go from heel to toe, standing straight, and you don't lose your balance and move forward, you are perfectly aligned to sing and to voice. But also look at babies. Babies are the perfect voice making machine. Watch a baby cry. Watch its diaphragm moving in and out. It's not going up here. There's no breathing from the top. It's coming from the diaphragm. The mouth is open. The tongue is laid like this, completely open, and it goes, wow. And I'll tell you 2 other things, well, 3 things that happen from there.
Go on.
When you make that first noise as a baby, you go, ah. The first things you learn to do are mouth closed, mouth open, breathing. What's the sound you make? Ma. Ma. Universally, ma. The matriarchy, that name was given to us by the babies, ma. It's the first sound we make that becomes a word, ma. And from there, the air that's moving from your lips outwards, you go ma, pa, ba. That is controlled explosion from your mouth using your lips. It's the first muscle movement any baby in the world has ever used. Ma, pa, ba. The universal family. Mammy, pappy, baba.
This is what I'm going to be doing when I'm making a cup of tea in 10 minutes.
Pa, pa, ba. That's your first lessons that I teach people when I learn. I'm teaching people to sing. Ma, pa, ba.
Yeah, and I'm, you know, one of the things in the back of my mind now, having a chat with Bex, we can maybe do a workshop with you at some point. And
do a voice workshop. I love it. I'll get you all standing properly, and I'll get you all yelling.
Oh, amazing, and doing all kinds of singing as well, which would be right. So we've got 10 minutes left, and if anyone wants to put any questions in the chat as well, you know, because we've got the final question which I'm going to ask, and then we'll probably open it up. But we have the final question which we ask every single woman on these interviews, and it's the 3 things. If you're stranded on a desert island, what 3 items would you take to sustain you? I think, Cheryl, what you got, so there might be a bit of pushback. So tell me, Cheryl.
You can push. I've lived a life on the boundaries, and I like a bit of push and push. I would want to take, the first one I'd take is my trailer. If you're putting me on a desert island, I'm a traveller, and I'm taking my trailer. And so I'm going complete with trailer. And on my trailer, you know, I've got the whole eco business, so I'm completely self-contained on that island. The second thing I'd take would be my iPad, which I can run from my trailer because it's the sun will power it. So I will have all the music and all the stories that I need. And the third thing I would take with me on that island is my family. And by that, I mean my cooperative family. So I would become in essence, the very thing that got me here is a colonizer. I would colonize that island with a cooperative family, and we would create the Commonwealth.
No, so this is my only slight pushback. They might have to be laminated families.
Okay. No, well, that'd be a boat person. I'd get us all on there. And a laminated boat. That's printed.
Well, it was one of the things on Desert Island Discs. I think it was Kathy Burke. You know, it was one of her items, which was who would she take? You know, what item? And she said it was a guy of Dragon's Den, and she had a major crush on. She did have a life-size laminated kind of like surfboard of him, so she could just line him all time. So
oh, I might do that then. I might have a set of I'd have Johnny Depp, David Bowie, Mark Bolan. Yeah, I could take a few of them with me, but I could get them on my iPad.
You could. Anyway, so that's the kind of, in terms of the questions and things, that's kind of that's what we've been through that. And just huge thanks, Cheryl. But if there's anybody, we've got 5 minutes, I think, you know, and Bex as well, you know, have anybody got any questions or any comments or reflections? That was such a rich hour, Cheryl. So first of all, thank you. You know, there's all kinds of things I want to go off and do some research on and come back to you about. But anybody else, any reflections or questions?
I thought it was really powerful, Cheryl, when you're talking about you didn't climb that greasy pole, you were pushed up it. I wonder if you had any words of advice for women who want to help other women, who want to help do that pushing. How do you start that? How can you do it without being patronizing or using the skills that you've got?
We did it Co-ops UK, because you know I was saying, you know, the vice chair is a placeholder for women. Yeah. And so it was the election, and I've been talking about it with Jenny and you know, the women. We kind of got together, and they don't like that. You know, you're not allowed to talk to people out of school, and I wonder why. And so, but we did, and we were talking with each other and said, yeah, go for it. And it wasn't like we picked lots. We kind of talked about who would go for it and how we'd do it, and do you know what I mean? And open that door. And then we found out, and not surprisingly, that there were other people pushing an alternative woman. Do you know what I mean? And wanting to make this the battle of the women, that there was only one place. So we would have this battle of women to get this one place. So we subverted that. So Emma, who's brilliant, she's grand. And so after the meeting, after the real meeting, we just stayed on and said, okay, there's two of us and one place. So let's work together, and whichever one of us gets in, we're going to do the same thing anyway. We're going to open the door to all the others. So we subverted that it wasn't cooperative. We were being told to compete rather than to cooperate. And so all we did was kind of break that unwritten rule. You don't have to compete. You don't have to be forced to do things that go against your nature and go against your self-interest and go against your collective interest. Just refuse to do it. So we just refused to do it. And now Emma is doing, she's got a subgroup, and she's doing stuff around platforming and IT and how we can all better communicate, talk, whatever. So it didn't really matter which one of us went forward. We're doing the same things anyway.
Yeah.
So don't let them make you compete. Don't let them do that. And I think, you know, whenever you're looking at it, if I was going to leave this with some advice, my advice would be for women, young and old, think about the world in 3 pillars. It's the visionary and the poets who go, we could do this, we could do this. And then there's the technicians, and they go, well, we could do this by doing X, Y, Z. And then there's the philosophers and the priests who go, well, should we do this? So when you collectivize, make sure there's somebody from all those pillars in that conversation to determine what it is we're going to do, and try and hold those 3 pillars within yourself. So as a person, you're constantly asking, could I do this? Should I do this? You know, what's the impact of this? A constant dialogue within yourself and collectively with other women, and we do it together. And Rebecca, I've known Rebecca for quite a while, was being fantastically supportive, absolutely fantastically supportive of things that, you know, I've been doing, just like the other women. So it's not like Rebecca is outside of this. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Rebecca, and if I wouldn't have been introduced to you. And the Irish have got a saying, you know, a stranger is a friend you haven't met yet. So it's not just all the women that I already know that we're already working together. Every new woman that comes on board is a stranger we haven't met yet, that becomes part of our collective.
And it was part of the ruse really for me and Beck last year to go, how do we get to meet all these amazing women? Oh, let's interview them.
Yeah, exactly.
Me, you know, I'm much less connected than Bex is, so it's, for me, it's just been like an absolute treat, you know, so because it's just all different stories and different perceptions as well, you know, you know, we are unique amongst ourselves. But anyway, I can gab on, but we've got 2 minutes. Any other reflections or comments before we say goodbye to Cheryl?
That sounds ominous.
I think you've just awed everyone, Cheryl. Everyone's speechless.
Doing my funeral like this.
I've said some really lovely things in the chat. So Nadia says it's wonderful to hear your journey and your family history. Tanya had to leave early, but said she's looking forward to catching the rest later. And Jenny Barnes said you're still inspirational, Cheryl. Val says that was so invigorating, thanks. And also PS this morning reminded me why I love being in the Co-op Party. I mean, the Co-op Party you've touched on a little bit, so remind me, you co-founded the Disability Network, didn't you? Was there nothing there before that?
There was no Disability Network and there was no BAME network. And you know, if you get, like I said, if you get a chance and you get in the door, you got to move on. So as a community worker and a traveller, I'm used to being in a place and then moving on. I like it. I live my life like that, either as a community worker or a singer or within the co-op movement. So the thing I'm happy I left behind was the Disability Network and the BAME network, although I never call myself BAME. And I don't like the word BAME at all. I don't like the label, but you have to work with what you've got, don't you, and kind of move that forward. But when we say BAME, we're talking about people in a diaspora, and all that means. So if we think of diaspora people, the impact of being in a diaspora and the impact for a host community of people being forced across. Julia didn't come to Sheffield because she looked at a brochure and thought, wow, I'm going to go to Sheffield. Her family was starved, most of them to death. She was put on a boat. She came to Sheffield to work in the steelworks for the Duke of Norfolk and his friends. Yeah. There's no such thing as free movement unless you are immensely privileged. So when we talk about people moving, the commodity formerly known as human, we just move from this place to that place to benefit other people. The impact on those people of that, the tearing and the ripping of family and home and community, that goes down the generations. At what generation do we, and I'll use me as Irish, you know, when do we stop singing those songs? Those songs that we all learn, those songs of absolute sorrow.
Yeah.
For solace, you know, for solace. And so it's when we're talking about people and race, whatever, if we start to add labels like colour, it's black and it's white, we've immediately dehumanized.
Yeah. We
really need to be very wise, you know, in terms of the language we use about people and the relationships that will develop. When I was 22, I was on the street holding my friend who was dying because he was stabbed by someone, because back in the day, if you were Irish, you were a terrorist. Yeah. And I had to put my hand in his body to try and stop the blood from flowing. I've been in Belfast and worked with the really brave women there that were building nurseries across that divide. If there's one thing that puts the fear in the marrow of my bones, because I've lived it, is sectarianism and division and
Mhm.
labelling and othering. Because once we start to be less than human and less than part of a bigger family, all right, with different characteristics, but a family, a human family, we start to murder each other. And that might sound excessive, but it is true.
Yeah, no, it is. Again, I could talk. I mean, that was a big part of my research years ago. So yeah, it's fascinating. I do, Cheryl, I don't want to stop you, but I have to.
Somebody has to.
I'm really sorry. And just to say, I'll bring it to a close and just say, honestly, Cheryl, and if you can just stay on, me and Bex will just do a bit of a debrief with you in a minute. But just to say to everybody else, thanks for your time today. It's 10 o'clock, so I know it's not the ideal time, but thank you for just making the time to come and listen to Cheryl. Next, we've got another one in a few weeks, actually, where the next Women's Voice is with Suzanne Westhuizen, who's the chair of Quats Europe and also the vice chair of the ICA. So she's, again, very different woman, but inspirational in her own way. Based in, she's Danish, so I love Denmark. So that's something else in the diary. But mainly, thank you, Cheryl, and thanks everybody else. It's been it's been a great way to start the day, to be honest. I'm super invigorated now, so thank you.
Thank you all for coming.